A transgender child at the center of a recent article in the Free Press has spoken out about that story's publication. Let's first take a look at what the article had to say. This is going to require a bit of explanation and setup. So earlier this week, the Free Press published an article that was called "I Felt Bullied, Mother of Child Treated at Transgender Center Speaks Out." The mother told the Free Press that her child, which is given the pseudonym Casey in the article, was treated for gender dysphoria at the Transgender Center in St. Louis with a puberty blocker implant at 14 years old. Carolyn, that's the mother, said that rather than offering relief, Casey, quote, experienced a devastating decline in their mental health and physical health after this intervention, and that her pleas to have the implant removed were rebuffed by doctors at the Transgender Center.
Now, a Twitter user popped up this week writing, "I have reinstalled Twitter to respond to this story and make sure my voice is fully heard. I am Casey. My real name is Alex, but my mom decided it would be best to hide it for anonymity. But this is my story, not hers. This is not the Free Press's story. About a week ago, my mom contacted Emily Yaffe without my knowledge and told her what was supposed to be our story. She expressed her frustration with the transgender clinic at Washington University, many of which are false perceptions that my mom has about the doctors and the clinic. I learned of this article through my mom over the phone when she asked if it was okay that the Free Press published the article. I said that I wanted to read it first, and when I read the draft, I was disgusted with what the reporter and my mom had made my experience out to be. The article claims that my mental health issues can be attributed to the Ceprelin implant. However, my personal experience shows that this is not the case. Since COVID-19, my mental health has been declining, and it was already an issue. Upon interviewing Emily Yaffe, myself and I was told that I had no say in whether or not the article was published. I asked if my consent was required to publish the article, and the reporter told me that's not how these things work. Now, writer Noah Berlitowski tweeted, "It sounds like Emily Yaffe and Bari Weiss deliberately set out to help a transphobic parent bully her child and deny that child medical care. This is not how ethical journalists operate. They also appear to have concealed the child's dissent from the narrative."
So there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
I don't agree with Noah's characterization of this at all.
I don't think I do either.
I mean, first of all, as a basic journalistic practice, it's not, and I don't blame the child for not understanding how this works, but you don't get to give consent. You can give consent to whether you're going to be interviewed, but you don't get to decide you don't like the tone or the thrust of the article. You don't have any. I was seeing some people on Twitter responding to Noah oh, this violates HIPAA or something. Well, the journalist doesn't have the obligation not to violate HIPAA. And I don't think. Obviously, we don't know either of these people, and we don't know their speculation. I have to speculate about what the deal is. I doubt this mother is trying to bully her child. She probably has, it sounds like she has a lot of very reasonable concerns about this young person's well-being. The child, regardless of what you think about the gender issue, seems to be going through some tough times, and I'm sure the child. Sorry, I think it's a male child.
They identify as non-binary now.
The child is in a rough spot, and their parents, I'm sure, want the best for them. And there's a dispute and a debate and a disagreement over what that is. It sounds like the child was not in a good mental state before, is not in a good mental state now. I'm not trying to overstate and say that the puberty blocker is doing a lot of ill that wasn't there before, but doesn't seem like it's making the situation better. And I don't at all blame the mother for having questions about whether giving my child many different potentially life-altering drugs when my child is still having a lot of bad, is not mentally well, is not, their grades are not doing well, is gaining weight, is going through bodily changes. Look, I totally understand the parent being skeptical of that.
So let's take a step back, because what Alex was complaining of, what the kid was complaining of in this series of tweets, wasn't specifically trying to litigate whether or not they should have access to gender-affirming care, hormone blockers, and the like. They currently do still have hormone blockers in, and the reason is because they have their parents have joint custody over them. The father supports the child in keeping the hormone blockers in. The mother is the only one apparently in the child's life that wants to take it out, and so they're at an impasse. In the courts, it's been decided that the kid can keep the puberty blocker. Now, what Alex was complaining of was the idea. I agree with you. You can't just dictate to a journalist what they're going to do with the story. But if a subject of your story comes forward with a statement that contradicts the narrative that you're explaining in the story, offers up a fact check of some kind, and you decline to include that as part of your story, at a certain point that becomes a choice to withhold facts that undermine perhaps an argument that is intended to be made in the story.
I don't really think what the child said contradicts what appeared in the story.
Let me be specific about it. The child specifically was upset about the framing of the people at the hospital being antagonistic to the mom. The mom in the story, Caroline, the author framed it as the bringing up suicide statistics to pressure the mom into allowing the hormone treatment, whereas what Alex says is that of course they mention statistics about suicide, but actually affirm to the mother that Alex didn't seem to be at any risk of suicide as an individual, which again is not something you would say if you were trying to scare someone to saying, get a hormone implant, or else your kid is going to die. So I think that's a fact that directly contradicts the narrative that is articulated by the story.
The mom and the child disagree about the tone or the characterization. I don't know that that's a fact.
Right.
It's a disagreement over.
It's a disagreement that the authors chose not to add as a counterpoint
this
in the
author,
story.
Emily Yoffe, she used to write for Slate. She's written for Reason Magazine before. I know her. She is the most thorough journalist I have ever worked with, bar none. She's written things, and when there have it needed to be a correction, she's a person who will correct her work if it rises to that level.
Well, she declined to do so here.
Well, that tells me then that a correction was probably not worthy.
Well, I was a journalist, an editorial senior politics editor at The Intercept, and if I had written a story like this and I had quoted someone in the story who later came back to me and said, I disagree with the characterization in the story. From my perspective, this is what the counseling was like. You put both of those things in your story. As a lawyer, you would put all of the relevant facts in the story, and to the extent that as an opinion writer, I agree with one set of facts or the other, I explain why. I go back to the mother and I say, oh, well, your child actually says that you shouldn't have felt coerced because they explained to you that they personally were not at risk of suicide. What do you make of that? Is that true? And then the mother has an opportunity to say, no, in fact, I was told that my child specifically was at risk of suicide, and then we have a factual dispute that we can tee off.
This is something that this journalist has done.
Or alternatively, Robby, the mother can say, I still, despite being told that my child was not at risk of suicide, still felt scared enough, and I felt pressured subjectively. And that's a fine thing to write, and people then can take the facts as they are. Emily chose not to do that.
I mean, again, I know her from her work that she does choose to do that. So the fact that this doesn't appear in the story suggests to me that there was not that dispute was not made prior to publication.
So you're saying that you think that Alex's tweets are misrepresenting their experiences, that they're lying.
I don't know this person at all, but I know Emily Yoffe very well, and I know her work to be an unimpeachable character. So what do you want me to say?
I would like there to be a discussion that isn't rooted in one's personal character assessments of a journalist. I think that the reality is what we see before us, which is that unless someone is disputing that this is really Alex, unless someone is disputing that what Alex is describing is the problem is we can't even have an argument, a discussion about whether what not Alex has said is true, because instead of doing what I would argue a journalist should do, which is bring Alex's perspective, brings Alex's facts back to the mother and have a fact off, have a debate, have all of the facts included in the article and allow people to make their own decision. A decision was made to exclude relevant information that frankly was not convenient to a certain narrative, that there is a pushiness that is coming from transgender, gender-affirming hospitals and care centers, et cetera, that is pushing parents into one decision-making decision or another.
Some update to the article might be forthcoming, given that this person, the child, has come out and said this. I don't know that the child said this in previous conversations. We'll see where it goes now. But I don't want to get lost in the weeds here. I think this is probably a pretty horrifying place for a parent to find themselves in, being unsure the right way to proceed with medical care for their 14-year-old, actually having a disagreement with the other parent of the child, being in a co-parenting, I think there must be divorced or split up or something like that, and sincerely wanting to do what's best for your child, and having a disagreement about what that is. And having the situation not being improved by medical intervention after medical intervention after medical intervention, and wondering if At what point am I just like sticking my child full of too many needles?
That's a tough position that many parents who co-parent are in.
I would be horrified.
And they have disagreements over any number of things that go on in a child's life.
Yeah.
What school to send them to, what doctors they should see for other kinds of things, whether or not they should be allowed to have plastic surgery, whether or not they should have a curfew, whether they should be allowed to hang out late night with their partner.
Whether they should be potentially sterilized. I mean, it's a big issue.
Yeah, it is a big issue.
Yeah.
And so either you believe that parents have the right to decide that issue, or you believe that an authoritarian state should step in and intervene between a decision.
I don't think that.
I'm not accusing you
up?
of anything. I'm saying these are the options. You said it on the show.
I've said if the parents are on board and the kids are on board and the doctor's on board, that's fine.
So I have also a right to state what the options are clearly. And the options that are presented, because I think stories like this really, people's feelings about what parents should do aren't really what's at issue. The issue is whether legislation that's coming down the pike is going to interfere with the parental rights. These are two parents with countervailing interests here. And do you believe that parents should be able to work this out between themselves as parents without the state's intervention? Or do you believe an authoritarian state should step in and intervene between what one parent and a medical professional think is appropriate versus what another parent and a medical professional thinks is inappropriate? And that's the only decision here. And unfortunately, the argument is, I'm not saying this, but the argument and the critique of Emily Yoffe's article is, and Bari Weiss's and some of the things that have been published over there is, that there is an agenda to frame these kinds of issues as not simply parental discussions, but as somehow different and should be treated differently because of the nature of transgender issues and how balkanizing and divisive they are in the public. And I think it does a disservice to the difficult issue that is being faced by this family for it to be weaponized this way, including, I agree, by Noah Brudaleski, who I think is being a little unfair in framing the mother as a bully, when I do think she probably has the best interest of her child at heart. There's just a difference of opinion here, and that's the tough stuff of making a family.
Heartbreaking situation to be in. I can't imagine it. It must be very difficult for all involved. All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.